This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. We're going to talk about lagers today on the podcast, and my guests for that are Karlton Graham and Steve Holle of KC Beer Company. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Hey, great to be here.
We've got another remote edition of the podcast, but we're enjoying our own face-to-face conversation via digital means. It's sadly too early in the morning for me to have a pint of your Helles or Pilsner or Dunkel in front of me. I wish I did. Nonetheless, we're going to talk about how they have crafted some of these iconic beers for their lager-focused German-style brewing company in Kansas City. One of their beers, the Helles, was a Beer of the Year for Craft Beer and Brewing last year, so congratulations on that. We're going to delve into what makes their lagers special. Before we do that, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize like Russian River, Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Samuel Adams, and more trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by RAR North Star Pils, a new base malt to set your compass by. RAR North Star Pils is crafted for brewers looking for a domestic Pilsner malt with low color and low modification. North Star Pils carries overtones of honey and sweet bread supported by flavors and aromas of hay and nutty character. Suitable for any beer style, but particularly crafted brewed versions of classic lagers. Let RAR North Star Pils guide your craft by visiting bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. So, Steve and Karlton, we typically start off the podcast with a little bit of history on you all. Maybe Steve, walk me first through a couple-minute history and how you got to where you are owning the brewery, and then Karlton, if you want to pick up from there and kind of share how you got to where you are now and how this interest in this kind of focus on lager brewing built for both of you all.
So, my family's German by ethnic background. My father still spoke German as a child growing up in the Midwest in a small town. So I was used to having a beer with my dad growing up, and there was always something that was a familiar thing in our household, and we enjoyed with family and friends. But because of my dad's background, I studied German in high school and college, and then I spent a semester overseas in Hamburg as a college student. So I got immersed into the culture and got exposed to some better beers. And then that interest carried over later in life. I got into home brewing, and then I started writing for magazines, and then did a couple of book projects with the Master Brewers Association. So this became kind of a calling due to my family background and connection to Germany and the love of the beers I developed when I was living over there. So it became a pursuit, sort of a calling. It's an area of brewing that a lot of brewers don't focus on, and I felt like there was a niche that we could work in and still enjoy it, because these are the beers that Karlton and I really like to make.
Karlton?
Yeah, so I was, had another career in a different kind of business for many years, and then I was one of those home brewers that kind of found a way to get involved in being part of the business. So I went to the Siebel Institute Master Brewer Program the spring of 2012. Hey guys, if you're listening, miss y'all. And then actually it was one of the stories that gets told often around here is the story of how I got connected to Steve and Kansas City Beer Company. He had this brewery in planning well before he met me, and he had actually sent off to the Dumans Academy in Munich to put a job posting up on a wall up there, looking for a German-trained brewer from the Dumans Academy to come out and help start the brewery and help kind of be the first brewer at the brewery. And I just happened to be there at at the Dümens Academy in Munich at the time that he put that job posting up there, and I happened to live 3 miles from where back in Kansas City, I lived 3 miles away from where, at the time, the most likely and what ended up being the location of the brewery. So there's a lot of just pure coincidence and luck involved with that.
Kismet, right? Kismet would be the word. Some cosmic coalescing of forces that just that led it into being. So as you think about creating this German style brewery together, talk to me a little bit about how you kind of envisioned what you're going to make, how you're going to sell it, how you're going to differentiate this kind of beer, what it was going to be that sets it apart from other styles. I mean, this I think becomes kind of a common question that I have for brewers that building personality in lager brewing is such a fine-tuned process. How did you all work together to kind of construct this idea of what your approach to lager brewing and German style brewing is going to be?
Karlton, I'll take a shot at that first. So I had attended a short course at Dümens Academy also, and then prior to opening the brewery, I don't know how many dozens of breweries I visited with some other brewer friends, one of which is Bill I, who's the owner of Bierstadt Lagerhaus. Bill and I spent a lot of time talking to brewers in Germany, but basically just observed, and we talked to the brewers about how they made their beer. And I studied for the Institute of Brewing and Distilling exams for diploma brewer designation, but in studying for that, many of the texts I read were German brewing texts, Kunze in particular. But so I had some background in how Germans made beer, but we went and visited all these breweries and we saw how they did it. And then the ones that we thought were really the good ones, which Augustiner, Andex, somebody that you interviewed or had for an article here, Schönraum with Eric Toft. You saw what they did. It was decoction mashing, 2-stage fermentation, and then lagering, cold lagering. Just we kind of wanted to follow what the places that made really good beer and try to be really true to that tradition of brewing. And what I've always said is that I think one of the pitfalls of making lager beer, it's a long, slow process, and there are a lot of times where you can skip one step. Well, no one's going to notice that, and I can skip another step, and nobody's going to notice that. But then you end up having skipped a bunch of steps, and then you do notice. But it's time, patience, cold temperatures, and just taking care of all the little things, because lager is a subtle beer, and the subtleties only come out when you pay attention to the details.
When you start thinking about ingredients and flavor in your lager beers, talk to me a little bit about how you think about ingredients and and build these kinds of flavor profiles that are substantial and interesting, but not too interesting. I mean, that also becomes that challenge with lager brewing, that you're trying to eke out character, but also not push too far and go overboard on that. Talk to me a little bit about how you think about that.
I'll let Karlton answer that.
Well, actually, it would be better if Steve answered, because this is one of his favorite things to talk about is the difference between malt that you might source from the United States versus Europe, and the hops as well. You've got to use noble hops from Germany to get the right flavor. And I think what a phrase that's often used when talking about these German lager beers is that it tastes right, that it has the right flavor. And I think what that's referring to is that it tastes like Andex Edelstoff, or it tastes like Augustiner Edelstoff, or the Andex Doppelbock. Yeah, or, I like the Tegernsee as well. But if it tastes like some of those beers, or tastes very similar to those beers that are considered truly the greatest examples of their style, then you're probably doing something right. And why are those beers so popular and thought of to be so fantastic? A lot of people would have a hard time describing it. It's just that je ne sais quoi. It's that untouchable character that when you drink the beer, you know that it's good, it's well made, and that you want to drink it again, and it just has that high degree of drinkability. So I actually kind of forgot the exact point of the question at this point, but just like Steve alluded to in his last answer is that we're trying to do things the way that they're done to achieve that particular flavor, that right flavor for each of our styles.
But, even within the world of German brewing, there are differing flavors between those kind of paragon breweries that you're looking for, and figuring out where you are going to land. Part of it is also a process of understanding what your brewing system and what ingredients, walking through your water and all of these other things impact that kind of flavor. Maybe we should approach it from a different direction and talk about what, as you started brewing and started honing these things. And when I say that, I mean, you didn't start brewing the exact beer you wanted to brew right out of the gate. I'm sure it was a good beer. I'm sure some of these were good. They just weren't exactly what you wanted, because every kind of, every process of lager brewing is a process of fine tuning, honing, and getting better at it as you brew. Maybe talk to me about some of the things, from that initial start of brewing that you started to tweak to bring, kind of pull, your Helles and Pilsner into focus. That it was, was there that kind of process of kind of molding and shaping and learning from, as you were brewing, to kind of make very small tweaks, to bring it exactly to where you wanted it to be?
I'll give that one to the head brewer.
Well, so I think what you're talking about there is just different adjustments that we've made over time to try to either make it easier to brew a beer that's just as good, or to try to improve the overall quality of the beer. And to answer that question, you're kind of talking about the story of adding technology to the brewery. The very first batch of Helles that we ever made here, which was the very first batch of beer I think that we ever made, that we ever brewed, I still consider it to be just about the best batch of Helles that we ever made. And part of that, I think, was because we were just filling the fermenters up halfway. And I think I capped the tank a little sooner than you would normally, thinking it had to fill out all that headspace with pressure before it could naturally carbonate the beer fully. And I really liked the sulfur quality of that first batch of beer. I think it had a really unique flavor that I almost will never forget. So, but as time has gone on, we've added a couple thousand barrels of cellar capacity and a centrifuge and a bottle machine, and a lot of equipment around here as we've grown. So it's not possible to make the beer exactly the way that first batch was made. And then each time something changes, you have to sort of compensate maybe in another way to try to keep that beer tasting fantastic. So, but that just has to do with the equipment that we have. I don't think that any aspect of the brewing process, fermentation or cellaring, I mean, those are all basically set in stone. The only thing that we've tweaked is the gravity of the beers, maybe to see if we like the way it tasted, a little bit lower gravity or a little bit not really higher gravity, but we've played around with lower gravity versions of most of our beer. And then you just have to try to manage that natural carbonation and the centrifuge process and the packaging so that you end up with a bottle of beer that tastes the way that you want it to.
When you say gravity, let's talk about Pilsner and Helles in that regard. What kind of range are you talking about? Where are you now, and where have those experiments taken you?
So we've always been at the sort of the higher end of starting gravity for our Helles and Pilsner, I guess, compared to maybe other examples that you would find from breweries that make a lot of beer like we do, like Helles and Dunkel. So our Helleses started out at 13 Plato, which would be sort of in that Edelstoff range, I think, and not really in the standard Augustiner Helles range. But we have tried making that beer with lower starting gravity on several occasions over the years. I think that those decisions were driven a little bit by believing it would do better in competitions, believe it or not, or also that maybe people would find it a beer that you could have 4 of instead of 3 of if it had just a little less sugar in it at the end. But we've gone back to 13 Plato Helles. We like it more, and it's it's I don't know if it still is, but for 90% of the time we've been open, our beer garden and tasting hall Helles was the number 1 selling beer that we would serve here on site. All the regulars love it and drink it. All the people that work here love it and drink it. So we've gone back to 13 Plato after a little bit of playing around with 12 and a half.
Yeah.
Pilsner is a similar story, but it has stayed lower. So if I'm remembering correctly, it started at 12.
Right.
And we tried 11 and a half and 11, but I think we're at 11 and a half right now.
Right.
And the other things that we've tried with Pilsner is just changing the hops. Of course, like any brewer would, you kind of try a couple different approaches. We used to put a lot of hops in at the end of the boil that were type 90 hops, and Steve felt like, and others felt like there was just a little bit of a maybe grassy note that came from adding so much vegetal matter right at the end of the boiler in the whirlpool for Pilsner. So we actually, after, it wasn't easy, but we actually tracked down some type 45 hops so that we could get the same amount of, presumably oil, acid, IBU addition at the end of a boiler and whirlpool, but add way less vegetal matter, so we could sort of tweak that little flavor aspect of our Pilsner, and we've stuck with that since we found those hops and bought them.
Our best-selling beers are Dunkel. It's a 13
Right.
Plato Munich-style Dunkel. It's about 70% of all the beer we sell. So we're thankful that we have a flagship that gets put on tap in most of the local bars and restaurants. It's very popular. And as Karlton said, when I mentioned that people that tell me how great that beer is, I go, you know what? Nope. None of the brewers drink that beer. I mean, they do, but their choice after shift beer is Pils or Helles usually.
Sure.
And I said even the people that come in, but I think that's been one of the challenges. I think there's such a mindset that a pale lager has to be really light in body, or I think it's still, no matter, people are comparing it to a domestic lager, and there's something wrong with it if it has any flavor at all. But that's why Helles is my favorite beer that we make, and I like it just because it's a malty beer, but it's pale malt, and a pale beer can be malty and round and full and flavorful. The other thing I like to say all the time, you compare it to artisanal homemade bread, where you've gotten good flour and you've used a very unique yeast strain. If you kneaded the dough and you've taken days to make this perfect loaf of bread instead of just putting Red Star yeast and all-purpose flour in a bread maker. Both ways you get bread, but I think it's like beer with a true German-style pale lager. It takes time, but you get this wonderful, subtle, rich, but highly drinkable beer. And one of the other things I said, I don't apologize that most of our beers are very refreshing and thirst quenching, because beer's made to be drunk like life in big gulps. That's what I like to tell people.
I want to unpack this idea of character in Helles, because I think you're absolutely right, and it's certainly one of Joe, our managing editor's common points that he hammers home over and over again. That just because it's Helles doesn't mean it should lack in character or somehow be bland and just easy to drink. That the best examples of Helles have strong character, but building that character and knowing right when to take it to that point of character where it doesn't become too much is a delicate one and an important one. So let's talk about that in a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by Mountain Rose Herbs, purveyors of the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Whether you want to add depth to your next golden triple with classic notes of cinnamon, pepper, and clove, or artfully layer exotic, zesty grains of paradise into a perfect ale, adding botanicals to your brewing is an easy way to customize a delicious flavor profile. Mountain Rose Herbs has been providing organic herbs and spices to chefs, herbalists, and dedicated brewers for more than 3 decades. Learn more at mountainroseherbs.com and get 10% off your first order with the code CRAFTBEER10. Also, Grandstand is your source for the latest trends in branded drinkware, apparel, and promotional items. They make your job easy by serving as your one-stop shop for everything you need to outfit your taproom and fans. Current trends include to-go drinkware, tie-dye prints, and portable coolers. Visit egrandstand.com/lookbook to see what's trending. So, Steve, it is a kind of delicate question to talk about Helles and building character in a beer that is also that needs to be easy to drink and a significant kind of quality. Talk to me about how you think about those hyper fine points of Helles, and maybe describe in a sensory kind of perspective what your perfect Helles, the Helles that you make, what it tastes like, and what the kind of parameters for that flavor are.
So to start with, and Karlton mentioned this, and I highly agree, is if I'm drinking a really nice German Helles, say it's an Amaskrugen, the first thing you get when you put your lips up to the rim of the mug is the sulfur. There's just a bit of sulfur that kind of creates this crisp, different character from an ale yeast. And I think that just adds to the complexity of the beer. And in some ways, I think lager yeast, because it has that character, there's so many very neutral ale yeasts now that I think lagers, prefer this is really clean thing. But I think there is oftentimes more going on with lager yeast because of that character, the sulfur dioxide that you get the yeast produces. And one of the ways I think Germans have that in their beers normally is because the Reinheitsgebot purity law requires that they naturally carbonate the beer. You can't force carbonate. That's an added fifth ingredient. So we naturally carbonate our beer also. And I think, as Karlton mentioned, you trap the CO2. You don't let it all blow off and gas off. So you retain a little bit more of that character and complexity. And then we do use German malt, and I like to, tell people, no, German malt's not better than American malt or this malt. But it tastes different. I think it's because of the growing conditions, the terroir, if you want to call it that. And we're trying to replicate a German lager, so I think it's important to use the malt, especially because it's a little bit richer, rounder, not quite as dry as domestic malt. So I think you get that character. And then we do decoction on our Helles. I think that adds a little bit of different malt character. My personal preference, I'm not a fan of caramel malt. So I think we use caramel malt in maybe one of our beers. And I just like that fresh malt character. And then Helles obviously is basically a single malt beer. It's mostly Pilsner malt, but even our Dunkel, we get that dark brown color, not by putting a lot of high color specialty malts in it. We use over 85% Munich malt in that beer, and it goes with all of our beers, our Vienna lagers. We use a base malt to create that color, not a high color specialty malt. So one of the things that's also difficult for what we do is we use 4 base malts in this brewery: Pilsner malt, Vienna malt, Munich malt, and of course wheat malt for our wheat beers. So it's a little bit different approach where you take subtle things instead of, you take a lot of Munich malt to create a flavor and a color as opposed to using a small amount of dark colored malt. You get a different flavor, and I think you get a little bit more approachable. I always feel that Germans are about balance. It's a different approach to brewing and drinkability. And I love IPAs, and I love to get smashed in the mouth with hops and aroma, and I love it. But it's a different brewing style, and that's why it's good that you have breweries like us that do what we do, and you have really good IPA breweries. But it gives people a choice on a different approach to brewing, and I think that's what creates diversity in the craft beer market, where somebody just really tries to focus on doing something a very special way, and then provides those opportunities through various breweries on different beer styles and interpretations.
You just threw out a whole bunch of things that I want to kind of follow in on. You mentioned that you only use floor malted malts?
No, 4 malts.
Oh, 4 malts.
four base malts. I would say most breweries, and that's probably the English brewing tradition, you use a pale ale malt, and then you create color.
Right.
And malt character by using small amounts of specialty malts. And we do use specialty malts, but basically for our beers, to get the color or flavor that we want, we focus on using a certain type of base malt. So and Karlton will know the percentages better. Our Dunkel is mostly Munich malt. Our Vienna lager is mostly Vienna malt. Our Pilsner is all Pilsner malt, but we're not just trying to tweak color with the specialty malt. And I think that gives when you use a lot of a low color malt, you just get a very subtle, different, balanced character that way.
I mean, from a pragmatic kind of production brewery standpoint, it certainly restricts your ability to find efficiencies by building most of your beers off of 1 or 2 base malts. You can't just fill up a silo full of something and then use that. From a kind of functional concern, that means that changes the way that you produce beer, huh?
Well, actually, I just to jump in on that, I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of breweries move that direction to using a base malt, and then you just add a little bit of this, little bit of that to get where you want on the color. But we actually last year we made 16,400, I think, barrels of beer, and it was all bagged in 1 bag at a time.
Wow.
So we don't have a silo. We don't use super sacks. We don't have anything like that. So actually, logistically, it's not complicated for us to keep making beer the way that we've made beer and adhering to the spirit of the recipes that kind of Steve had when the brewery was begun. It doesn't really matter that we use a bunch of Vienna malt and a bunch of different base malts. You just grab a bag and dump it in the mill, whatever you need. There's no real logistic issue with that.
Your poor brewing staff.
Yeah, I think I added it up last year. We did about 1 million pounds of malt, 55 pounds at a time.
Karlton and I are both sitting above the malt milling room right now, and they're crushing malt right now. It's probably louder in your room, Karlton.
Yeah, I think there's probably getting a little feedback, but it should only last, 15 minutes. They're actually just transferring malt right now.
When we do remote podcasts like this, it's hard to capture some of the kind of background noise and spirit of the brewery. So I actually am enjoying hearing some of that in the background. It's been a while since I've been able to go to a brewery in person. And so unlike you all that get to experience it more frequently, it does feel endearing and friendly to me. But so from that, that kind of malt perspective, since we're talking about that, talk to me about choosing specific malts. There are multiple options available, obviously, within any of these families of malts. How do you develop a preference, and what has driven some of those choices you make about, the malt house that you're going to bring in from, and the specific characters, as well as the way that those malts function within the brew house?
I don't think you're going to like the answer, but we
all that matters.
Not or I'm not.
We only get malt from one place.
Hey, that's fair enough. All I care about is the true answer on this.
So there's not a whole lot to discuss. So ERX is the malt supplier. It's right there in sort of central Germany.
Yeah.
So basically, in 6 years ish, we've used like Best Malt maybe once or twice, and a little bit of Ironman. When we couldn't get the ERX because it's all shipped in on shipping containers, if we've had something get hung up, or the train got stuck on the tracks or something and the malt didn't make it here, maybe we use a little bit of something else, but only out of that necessity. So yeah, we really haven't done a lot of what you just asked about. We just buy ERX Pilsner malt, ERX Munich malt right down the line.
Well, why'd you make that decision then? I mean, there has to be some thought process or preference that drives that.
Well, I think Steve talked to Eric Toft one day. I'll let him take it.
See, there's the answer. It all goes back to Eric Toft.
Yeah, I did talk to some
right.
German brewers and some American brewers that import malt, and I had used actually ERX malt when I was a home brewer and liked it, and I used Environment and Best Malt in doing all of our test batches. But no, we got the malt in and we tried it and we liked it, so we never saw a need to change. And they've been a great partner. They've worked with us, and I think they're happy that we did have a growing business. And I think we're a company that they can point to, that because I don't think they have a large import presence here in the United States yet. But we've been very happy with the malt, and they've got a good range of specifications for different varieties of malt that we use.
I want to talk to you then about hops. And I imagine you're going to tell me you use the same hops farm that Eric Toft uses too, but maybe not. Before we do that, if you're looking to expand your craft brewery, look no further than Abe Beverage Equipment for complete brewing and packaging solutions. Abe has been a trusted partner for over 1,000 breweries worldwide and is known for their excellent service. Contact Abe today for a quote on a complete brew system at abeequipment.com. Abe offers turnkey solutions from 3 to 60 barrel brew houses and canning lines from 15 to 90 cans per minute. Visit abeequipment.com for complete brewery solutions. Also, Craft Beer and Brewing's All Access subscriptions give you a year of the print and digital editions of the magazine, plus access to our library of video courses, a special deep dive email only for All Access subscribers, premium content, and All Access exclusive merchandise. Go to beerandbrewing.com and click on the subscribe button to join now. On that hops piece, obviously you mentioned that German ingredients are important to you, but again, there's a range in terms of hop varieties, of terroir and hops, even within Germany itself. Talk to me a little bit about making those kinds of selections, and then, for both Helles and then Pilsner, how you, have envisioned that hops character and dialed something in that's exactly what you want.
So I got introduced. We get all of our hops from a single family hop farm sites family in the Hallertau, in an area, town called Wohnzach in the Hallertau Valley. So this hop farm is right down the road from where Sam Adams gets their Hallertauer Mittelfrüh hops. And I like to tell people we also get our hops from the Hallertau, but we also get our malt from Germany too. So we take both major ingredients and get those from Germany. But he's been a great partner with us, and we just talked to him on the phone this week, and we're getting ready to place our order for the 2020 harvest. But he's been super to work with. And I keep thinking we probably should diversify our suppliers a little bit in case there's a hailstorm in the Hallertau and we have another access to hops. But we basically use Perle is our main bittering hop, Holle middle fruit, and Tradition for our late kettle hops. We do a couple of dry hop beers. We use a Mandarina Bavaria, sort of a citrusy Mandarina character to it. We've gotten saws from him before, which are not from his farm, but it's a 600-year-old farm. I've been there several times. I've sat at the kitchen table and had a beer or coffee and Flammkuchen with his mom and dad. I've been in the little tavern down the road where all the old farmers are sitting around and remind me of my dad's hometown in Hoffman, Illinois. So it's just a pleasure working with him. He does great service, and I think his hops are great too. But if Karlton's got something else to add there.
Well, I mean, it kind of connects with Erex. I mean, it's not broken, so why would we fix it?
And they're not too far apart, so they cooperate on shipping. Sometimes we can put our hop order on with a malt order.
Yeah, we've actually got our hops included with a malt shipment every year, so it's been convenient.
Well,
I mean, the hops are great. I don't know what better hops we could get. And Florian has year after year sort of made suggestions for, hey, the Tradition is really great this year. You've got to buy some of it, even though we don't normally buy a lot of Tradition. And he's been really helpful with just making sure we get everything we need every year and getting the best hops he has.
I think there's that really wonderful connection between craft brewers and that kind of craft side of agriculture that is, these small family-owned farms. And it's fascinating that you can even build those relationships with, European-based growers to kind of, create that connection. How, in that sense, does, when you mention you've got a great crop of Tradition in a particular year, do you then think about how I make a different beer with that? Or do you then think, how could I incorporate that into one of our existing beers? What does that process look like for you?
We have reacted to actually direct suggestions from Florian, but not often, maybe just 2 or 3 times. Where he's said, oh, these hops are really great. You have to try these, or you got to buy some of those. And then, okay, let's put some in. Let's make it part of the late hop edition on Beer X or Beer Y, and then see what we think. So we have done that, but for the most part, I think we're more interested in consistency around here than just about anything else. If you're going to make and sell 1,000 barrels of Dunkel a month, then you're more focused on making sure every bottle's the same as every other bottle than you are with playing with things like that.
Yeah. From a sensory perspective, how would you describe the hops in your Pilsner?
That's a good question.
How do you, and this is something I'm always, fascinated by, because brewers all build a mental standard for what their own thing should taste like. They build a brand standard, how they expect it to taste. Typically, there's some intersection between taste buds and language that exists, even if that's just an internal language in brewers' minds, to understand where their own parameters are for these things and when things might get outside of those parameters. And so, trying to talk about, or I always try to ask about what that language looks like for you. How do you build that mental picture and then define it for yourself?
Well, I know what I like about our Pilsner, and that is that there isn't one particular quality that stands out. So we use noble hops from Hallertau, and I think that they are balanced hops. So Middle Fru, for example, isn't known to have one specific strong character that you pick out immediately, say it's citrusy or it's grassy or something. It has a little bit of everything. It's a little bit floral. It's a little bit spicy. It might have just a little bit of fruit, some kind of fruit going on there. And so there isn't like a flavor that just jumps out, oh, this Pilsner tastes like this. It just has a nice, clean hop character, the right level of bitterness, and it's just something that you enjoy having. So I don't know what Steve would elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I always describe a good Pilsner as the flavors are delicate. They're there, but they're balanced and they're delicate, and particularly the bitterness. I would describe Pils as a bitter beer, but one that doesn't necessarily seem bitter. It's got a very noble, delicate bitterness that is very refreshing, I think, because bitterness is one of those things that makes beer thirst quenching, and that's why I think the particular style is great with a greasy steak or a pizza. It's one of the great partnerships in food and beer. But so that and the malt character is very clean and crisp and delicate, and then the aroma in the Pilsner, we just use late kettle hops or whirlpool hops. And so the aroma is very delicate. It's there, and it's almost when you drink a Helles, which doesn't have the same aroma profile, and then you have Pils, you can tell there's something there, and it's pleasant and it's enjoyable. But it just sort of something that that's a nice little aroma that adds to but doesn't overpower anything in the beer. So. And I think Karlton would agree. The first thing that goes off with the Pils is that subtle aroma character, because the oil, the hop oils that create that, are the first thing that go on a beer as it gets older, and so. But that's how I describe our Pilsner.
Yeah, I think that people would smell our Pilsner, especially if they're freshed up, and say, "Oh yeah, I can smell the hops.
Yeah,
I can smell it. I can pick it up," but might not say something real specific about that aroma. And I think that's fine. I think that's the way we want it.
Where do you dial IBUs in for your Helles and then for your Pilsner?
Oh,
go ahead, Karlton.
So Pilsner, that's something that has changed over the years a little bit. So we've come down to 32 from 37. Helles, we've actually come down from where we started on that as well. I think we're at 20.
Yeah, it was
right
22,
now.
and now it's 20.
Yeah, and it was 22. So those are the two beers we've probably actually played with the most compared to any other style. Well, save maybe the Fest beer.
We also,
but these are just little changes we made, and then we taste it and see if we can pick up a difference and if we like it or not. So
what has driven those kinds of lower IBU levels? Just a general preference, or has that been consumer driven in some way or another?
Most of the time, it's Steve having a glass of beer,
or
and
you too.
and Steve will say to me, "What do you think about this Helles? Do you think it's a this or that or whatever?" And we'll just get to talking, and then eventually we'll settle on an idea to make a little change or not, and then we'll sort of make that little change, track that batch through, and then try it and see if there's a big enough difference that we like that we stick with it. And so, yeah, the Helles and the Pilsner both have come down and stayed down. I guess we do like it a little less bitter.
Let's talk about your flagship Dunkel for a little while. Obviously, pale lagers seem to be the kind of primary focus for fellow brewers, and just this object of love and affection and this kind of common thread that unites lager lovers. But Dunkel, because you've kind of found a German analog for, a brown or amber ale that is, typically not as available in today's craft beer market, but still loved by beer drinkers. It's just created this opportunity for you to create a beer that gets out there in a wider, way in the market. Certainly the state of Missouri has plenty of American light lagers available to it, but not a lot of, certainly not kind of amber brown lager kind of approach. Talk to me a little bit about kind of formulating the idea, and then, we already talked a little bit about how you use large amounts of base malt. But let's talk about how that, that vision for creating that beer came around, and then how you keep it, crisp, but also flavorful and easy to drink.
So the recipes are basically based off recipes I got from German brewers, and I think the first thing that you would notice if you looked at how a German makes their beer. It's Munich malt, and Germans had various recipes when I was there. I'm sure Karlton got some from the brewing school there also. So I think that's one difference. We use a lot of low color amber Munich malt to create a deep, rich color, and it changes the flavor, because when you're adding a darker crystal malt or something, you're getting more roast and darker kind of flavors, which I would say our beer is very toasty because we use that and a couple of other small amounts of malt, but it's really got a very full-bodied malty character, but it leans very much towards, like I call it, toasted bread crust with a touch of caramel and maybe molasses in the care. So it's only 18 IBU. So I think when people drink that, they're surprised at how drinkable and approachable it is. It doesn't have those, because I don't like dark beers because I don't like those harsh, roasted, acrid flavors, which I don't think we have. We just have a hint of toast in it. So I think people are surprised that it's approachable. I also think, having lived in Texas and seen the success of Shiner Bock down there, I think people who can find a beer approachable that looks sort of exotic are attracted to that for some reason. But for whatever reason, it's been very successful, and I really like that beer too. I don't drink it as much as the pale lagers, but it's incredibly mellow and malty for 5% beer, just because of the high quality malts and types of malts we use.
And I think there's also, I don't know if this was part of your question or not, but the success of the beer, I think, is at least in part due to the fact that it's brown. It's not a pale lager, so you can add variety to a draft wall that may already have 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 pale lagers. And so when our distributors first went in and started to try to sell our beer, maybe it was a little bit easier to get a brown lager on. I don't know. We'll never know for sure. Yeah. But the beer also tastes really good. I think our Dunkel is just a really fantastic beer. It does taste like bread crust, and it's not the same as the other brown lagers, I think, that I've had from a lot of other breweries.
And I would say this, probably in terms of competitions and critics ratings, we have gotten some awards, but it's probably one of our least recognized beers, and I think some judges don't understand what they're drinking. I would call this a very old style Dunkel that was made back before World War I, before the malting technology was really sophisticated, and the malt color from a single kilning batch might have various colors because the heat couldn't be evenly distributed. So you got this color from a lot of lower colored malt, and it wasn't created by adding those caramel malts. So I think when I taste a beer, I haven't found one that has the same malt character that we do, because I think we take a different approach in building the malt grist bill for this beer, and it just tastes different than other people's. And I think when you're comparing it for purposes of judging or whatever, it's like, what is this doing here? Because it's a little bit different. Wouldn't you agree, Karlton?
I think it is different, and
yeah.
I went to GABF every year, many years in a row, and I would always try, if I could, the Dunkels that had won a medal, out on the floor in the after session, and I don't think I ever tasted one that tasted like ours. Yet I don't want to say I know this for a fact, but we're probably selling more Dunkel than any other craft brewery that I've ever heard of.
From my perspective,
so
I think you're right on that.
It must be a pretty...
Yeah. But that there is...
So it must be a pretty good beer,
The court of public opinion and those that are voting with their dollars is ultimately the real measure of success beyond just peer recognition within the brewing world. When you can do both, then that becomes this kind of holy grail. Sometimes that peer recognition leads to that commercial success. Sometimes that commercial success is completely divorced from that recognition. Both of them are valid modes. But it is a very cool thing that you've been able to build a flagship brand out of something that is just so different than what other brewers are leading with flagship brands out there. And I think you're probably right that with a lot of pale lagers already on tap room walls or tap lists and whatnot, that it's something else. And also, people don't make brown ales in the way that they used to. And so when there are people looking for that kind of thing, that kind of mellow, warming, slightly nutty, slightly toasty kind of beer, they say, I like this, and that becomes something that your bartender can recommend to them and gives them another avenue for it. Plus, yours has that kind of endearing quality of familiarity to it, even though no one knows why that might be.
But let me interject that I think some of it also has to do with the lack of caramel malt in the beer. I think one differentiating factor between Dunkel and a brown ale, other than the esters, of course, which would be present or not present, is that presence of the caramel malt, which makes it so that if you want to drink 6 beers while you're watching your favorite baseball team, the Dunkel just goes down easier, and it's a more drinkable. I don't want to use the word crushable. It's a 13 Plato 5% beer, but
right.
It's got a higher degree of drinkability to me personally, because it doesn't have that caramel malt that over time can kind of cloy things up a little bit on your palate and sort of exhaust your palate a little bit. This is just a very clean bread crust flavor that your palate generally does not get tired of as much.
And I would say there's a comparison to this. If you look at pale ales and IPAs, 20 years ago, everybody had a fairly, I think they were darker, more caramel malted. So if you look at most of the IPAs that are coming on the market now, they're much, much paler than they were 15 or 20 years ago. Sure. And I think that's what people are recognizing, is that strong caramel malt flavor reduces the drinkability of some of those beers, and you're seeing a much paler IPA today than you did in years past.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the other kinds of lager projects that you all have embarked on. I know last year for our Best in Beer issue, Karlton, you were driving your GABF entries out to Colorado for the Great American Beer Festival and dropped off some beers for us at the office for our Best in Beer issue. Which, by the way, that deadline for that is coming up a week from this Friday. August 28th is our deadline for our 2020 Best in Beer issue. But I digress. You have been brewing some big kind of Doppelbocks, some big different types of German, kind of rooted beers, but also kind of pushing into some more creative directions with these larger beers also. Let's talk a little bit, before we finish up here, about some of these more, I should say, boundary pushing or edgy kind of German inspired beers that you all are playing with on the bigger side of things.
Well, I think our most successful, boundary pushing beer that we've ever made was an idea I had, I don't know when it was exactly, maybe a few years ago, was to just double the gravity of Dunkel. So it's the exact same grist bill. There's no change in that. And it's just brewed to a much higher starting gravity, and it's a 10% alcohol version of Dunkel. We call it Dunkelbock, which I guess in Germany means a beer style, but here in Kansas City, because you can get Dunkel just about anywhere right now, it kind of has a reference to that very popular beer, and called Dunkelbock. And that beer just came out great. I mean, it's such a drinkable beer for what it is at 10%. So I don't know if you would call that pushing boundaries. I mean, it kind of is for us. But we do have a couple of beer styles that we've made.
That is certainly considered a pushed boundary.
Yeah.
And it just a straight linear scale of irregular Dunkel and produced that beer and no other changes?
Yeah. No other changes to the grist bill. The IBUs went up a little bit because I think you do need to do that for the much higher residual gravity. So you do need a little bit more IBUs. So it's not 18
Right.
IBUs like the Dunkel is. But anyway.
But at Karlton, I think that beer originated when, for whatever reason, we had a very efficient brew day, and we had more Dunkel left in the kettle after knockout.
Well, I did that on purpose. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. That's how originally we made Dunkel. Is we just boiled down more.
Yeah. So it was a increase in the gravity through boiling, and now it's more through an increased grist bill. But so we do play around. We don't do everything just the same way every time.
But we are working on developing an IPL that we'll bottle our first iteration of that tomorrow and try. So we will try a couple things here and there. The total volume of our production that goes into things like that is very small. But if you count up all the seasonal beers in our core 4 German brands, I mean, that's got to be 95 to 97% of what we do. But we do have that IPL coming out, and we had made a beer called Der Bauer, which is a dry hopped farmhouse ale. But we made it with all German ingredients and got a yeast strain from the Alsace Valley that was French, but we like to say German too. I guess they speak German around there, so... so we've played around a little bit with things like that, but nothing that the modern craft brewer would consider boundary pushing. We haven't put any fruits or vegetables or spices or purees or anything like that in our beer.
Well, in a world where everyone's doing it, I guess it can be transgressive to not do it, right? There's for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And, I think that's one of the cool things about beer today is that it's not just one thing, and that all of these things can exist, and that, that even beer consumers are a strange beast these days. And I see plenty of hardcore beer consumers who are trading for pastry stouts and also drinking a lot of lager. And, and so it can be, it's a strange one where, I think we have one idea around certain beer consumers, but they're growing even more complex than we're used to that. And, I think one of the things that you all do that's really fascinating is you've turned people into craft beer consumers who may not necessarily have considered themselves craft beer consumers. They weren't just drawn to, this idea of craft beer because they had to have something different. They just like good beer, and you created an option for them, and and created some beers that were interesting and that made them want to continue to purchase them. And so that when it comes to the broader world of beer, breweries that create that audience and don't just simply try to take a piece of the existing audience, those are breweries that should be celebrated. That wasn't really a question, but on that note, we typically close with an important question, which is, what does success look like for you all? What is the ultimate vision for KC Beer Company, and how will you know when you have achieved that success? Steve, I think that one's a good one for you.
Well, certainly, the first step is it starts with brewing good beer, and I'm proud of the beer we make. Our brewers and Karlton's whole team is, I think, focused on exceptionalism. I think they get what we're trying to do is something different, and we have a high standard of what we're trying to do. But it'd be great tasting beer, and then making sure we get people a chance to try that beer and try it at the peak of freshness. We haven't expanded our distribution very far from Kansas City, but we're focused on producing good tasting beer like you would find in Germany, and serving at the same level of freshness that you would get if you were actually having a beer in Germany. So that's basically our mission statement, and it just continues with making great beer, delivering it fresh and at high level of quality, And we do work very hard to market our beer, but we are marketing. I'd say we are very much focused on marketing the quality of our beer and hoping people can experience what we think is something different that we're doing that adds to their diversity choices in the craft beer business. So we have a fairly large number of investors in this brewery, and financial success is always a goal, but we want that financial success because we're making the right kind of beer.
That's well said. Are they local investors that care about serving the local community and being able to come in and also drink your beer?
They are. They do promote our beer, and that's been a very positive aspect of having a large number of local investors.
For sure,
yes.
for sure. Nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Set your compass by RAR North Star Pils. Mountain Rose Herbs offers the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Grandstand is your choice for the latest trends in branded drinkware, apparel, and promotional items. Abe Beverage Equipment offers complete brewing and packaging solutions. And Craft Beer and Brewing's all-access subscriptions are the best way to support this very podcast. Steve and Karlton, if people want to find... Actually, Steve, you could probably answer this one. If people want to find KC Beer Company, where do they find you all?
So our website is kcbier.com, kcbeer.com, and our Twitter handle is at kcbierco, at kcbeerco. So I don't know what our Instagram is, but that's close enough.
And if you're in the Kansas City, Missouri area, of course, stop by, check them out, have a pint or three.
We have a tasting room, and we have a very traditional Munich-style beer garden. I think that they would enjoy social distancing notwithstanding, although we are open, and it's been a great boost to have an outdoor seating area during this recent pandemic.
Well, Steve Holle, Karlton Graham, thanks for joining me on the podcast. I've appreciated talking about lagers with you all. Cheers.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We enjoy your magazine, so thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.